The first thing Grant saw when the front door opened was Atlas. Not me, not the postal inspector standing beside the entry table. Atlas. He stood square in the doorway with an old red leash folded once between his teeth. His ears were forward. His weight rested slightly off his right hip, the way it had since the injury that ended both our careers. He did not bark. Behind Grant, 3 hard-shell suitcases crowded the porch. Airline tags from London, Brussels, and Paris swung in the cold Virginia wind. His mother had one hand on the handle of a white suitcase and the other pressed to her chest. His sister stopped recording before her phone had finished lowering. Grant stared at me as though I had walked out of my own grave. I was thinner than when he left. I still used a cane for long stretches. The kidney disease that put me on dialysis had been traced to toxic exposure during my deployments, and the nerve damage and weakness it left behind still shaped every step. My transplanted kidney had not escaped those 74 days without damage. But I was upright, fully awake, and standing inside the house he had expected to control. Postal Inspector Mateo Ruiz lifted a clear evidence sleeve from the table. Inside it was a postcard of Prague at sunset, Mr. Sloan, he said. Before you step inside, I need you to explain why this postcard entered the United States mail stream in New Jersey 3 days before your flight left. 74 days earlier, Grant had laughed at the emergency plate beside our kitchen cabinets. It was a flat black panel mounted 6 inches above the floor, low enough for Atlas to reach with one paw. I had trained him to press it twice. Once could be an accident. Twice sent an alert through a battery-backed medical system connected to the transplant clinic and the county's dispatcher. Grant watched Atlas complete the sequence, then leaned against the counter and smiled. You know, normal people teach dogs to sit. Atlas knows how to sit. You know what I mean. I did. Grant thought every precaution was evidence that I had never really come home from the army. He said I turned rooms into checklists and mornings into drills. Sometimes I wondered whether he was right. That week, my creatinine had been climbing. I had been fighting nausea and dehydration, and Dr. Priya Desai had warned me that my margin for error was smaller than usual. My anti-rejection medicine did not care whether a marriage was tired or whether a family had a flight to catch. It had a schedule. I had followed that schedule since the transplant. I opened my smart dispenser and counted the evening tablets. Grant reached for the medication bag. I'll organize the next week for you. I can do it. You nearly took the evening dose twice on Tuesday. I caught it before I swallowed anything. He held out his hand. His face was patient. That was the expression he used when he wanted me to feel unreasonable. Outside, someone rolled a suitcase over the front walk. Atlas looked toward the sound. I placed my palm against the scar below his collar. Leave it, I told him. Back in the doorway, Grant took one step toward Atlas. A county deputy moved between them. You cannot block me from my own house, Grant said. The deputy did not raise his voice. The protective order says otherwise. Grant looked past him at me. His shock was already changing shape. First, then calculation. I had watched that transition in claims meetings, at family dinners, and once beside my hospital bed. Grant rarely stayed surprised for long. He preferred problems that could be renamed. This is a misunderstanding, he said. My wife has been medically confused for months. I kept one hand on Atlas's collar. Grant's mother, Evelyn, pulled postcard from her purse. The corner was bent from being handled too often. We wrote to her from every country, she said. We checked on her constantly. Ruiz held out a gloved hand. She hesitated before giving it to him. That hesitation mattered. Guilt was not always a confession. Sometimes it was a delay no innocent person needed. Ruiz slid the postcard into another clear sleeve. Atlas watched the plastic catch the light. On the front was the Eiffel Tower. On the back, in Grant's handwriting, were 6 words. Rest. We will call tomorrow morning. 3 days before the trip, Grant took a call during dinner and walked into the pantry to answer it. He closed the door, but the old farmhouse had thin walls. I heard the words balloon payment. I heard the number $427,000. I heard 83 days. When he returned, he folded his napkin over something he had written. Evelyn asked whether the lodge financing was finally settled. It will be, Grant said. His sister Brooke did not look up from her phone. She was editing footage for the European travel campaign that was supposed to relaunch the lodge before the bank lost patience. Evelyn turned to me. You should be grateful Grant still takes care of all this while you stay home with a dog. Atlas was under the table, his chin resting across my boot. I said nothing. Grant smiled without looking at me. Mom is not wrong. Naomi was not military police. She cleaned kennels and taught dogs to sit. Brooke laughed once. I could have corrected him. I could have explained patrol certification, detection work, lawful searches, evidence logs, and the hours spent teaching a working dog not merely to obey, but to remain functional under noise, heat, blood, and fear. Instead, I cut my chicken into smaller pieces and gave Atlas none of it. Silence had kept people alive in places where one careless sound could expose a whole team. I had not yet understood that inside a marriage, silence could protect the wrong person. At the front door, Ruiz placed the Paris postcard beside the one from Prague. His voice stayed soft, but every question had a destination. Evelyn pointed at the cards. There, that proves we cared. 7 postcards, 7 countries. Ruiz looked at her. It proves 7 items were mailed. Brooke crossed her arms. They were family updates. Who purchased the mailing service? No one answered. Grant shifted his weight and glanced toward the suitcases. He was checking distances, door to porch, porch to driveway. Driveway to the rental vehicle waiting at the curb. Old habits made me notice exits. Newer habits made me notice when other people noticed them too. Ruiz turned one evidence sleeve over. He did not show them the back yet. The postcards had once looked almost cheerful when Claire and Ruiz arranged them across an evidence table. Paris at night, a red tram in Lisbon, snow above Lucerne. Each one carried the same careful concern and the same promise that someone would call the next morning. No one ever did. The postcards had not been sent to comfort me. They had been sent to survive me. Brooke had designed the campaign in the office above Evelyn's garage. A week before the flight, she spread photographs across 2 monitors while her 16-year-old daughter, Lily, sat nearby with a stamp album open on her knees. Paris first, Brooke said, then Prague. Venice should land around the middle because the sponsor wants romance. Lily looked at the postcard preview on the screen. Why not mail them when you get there? Because content has timing. At that moment, I thought Brooke meant the sponsor schedule. She showed me 7 postcard designs and asked which photograph made the family look warmest. I chose none. A line of small gray text sat beneath the Prague preview. Lily leaned closer, then reached for the thin magnifying glass tucked inside her stamp album. What is Newark fulfillment? She asked. Brooke closed the window. Printing company, Grant called from downstairs. He wanted a photograph of all of us before the trip. Evelyn arranged everyone by height and placed Atlas at the edge of the frame, as if he were a piece of furniture no one had decided where to store. Grant put an arm around my shoulders. His hand felt heavy. We will be gone before you know it, he said. Through the garage window, a white boarding van turned into the driveway. Atlas stood before anyone knocked. The van stopped beside the garage with its yellow hazard lights blinking. Atlas did not bark. He moved between me and the front door, then looked back at my face. That was his old way of asking for information. Grant crossed the kitchen and caught the red leash from the hook. Relax, he said. He's going to a climate-controlled facility. Better than spending 10 weeks watching you sleep. 74 days, I said. What? You'll be gone 74 days. Grant pulled the leash tighter than necessary. Evelyn opened the front door before the driver could knock. A young man in a navy jacket stood on the porch holding a tablet and a scanner. Atlas Sloan? He's right here, Grant said. The driver crouched without reaching for him. People who work around dogs learn quickly that hands are not introductions. Atlas's pupils looked wrong. His tongue touched his nose twice, slow and unfinished. When he shifted his feet, one rear paw crossed over the other. The driver stood again. Has he been sedated? Brooke answered too quickly. Just something natural. He gets anxious. I turned toward the half-empty bowl near the pantry. Atlas had stopped eating after a few bites. What did you give him? I asked. Grant's fingers closed around the leash. Nothing dangerous. The driver looked at his tablet. I cannot transport an impaired animal without veterinary authorization. Our flight leaves in 3 hours, Evelyn said. I understand. I still cannot take him. At the front door on day 74, Ruiz tapped his phone and a recorded voice filled the room. Evelyn's voice sounded sharper through the speaker than it had in person. You were paid to remove the dog. I do not care if he is sleepy. Put him in the van and take him. The dispatcher on the recording stayed calm. Ma'am, our driver observed possible drug impairment. We require veterinary clearance. He is not a service animal. He is an old military dog with behavior problems. Atlas's ears turned toward the recording. Evelyn stared at the phone as though her own voice had betrayed her. That call was taken out of context. Ruiz stopped the playback. What context makes an impaired dog safe to transport? Grant stepped in before she could answer. My mother was stressed. Naomi's condition had become unpredictable. Atlas was protective and aggressive. I said nothing. Atlas had never bitten Grant. He had never charged Evelyn. The worst thing he had done was stand between them and me when their voices rose. People often call a boundary aggression when it is the first boundary they cannot cross. 74 days earlier, the driver returned to his van without Atlas. Grant watched him leave, then checked the time. We cannot miss this flight. You cannot leave me alone, I said. Brooke folded her arms. You have the alert system. My nurse comes tomorrow. Grant looked toward Evelyn. She looked away. Something in that small exchange changed the temperature of the room. What did you do? I asked. Grant crouched beside me. His voice softened. The nurse agreed you need rest. No strangers coming in and out. You have food, water, and your phone. My medication, I already sorted it. Bring me the bag. He stood without answering. I tried to follow him and the room tilted. My shoulder struck the edge of the counter. Atlas pulled against the leash, but his legs could not organize themselves. Grant dragged him toward the mudroom. Atlas's claws scraped across the oak floor. I grabbed the counter and called his name. For 1 second, Grant stopped. He looked back at me, not with anger, but with irritation. That hurt more. Anger would have meant I still existed as a person in the room. Irritation meant I had become a delay. Grant had spent 12 years deciding which claims were real, which losses were exaggerated, and which people were asking for too much. Somewhere along the way, he had begun reviewing his wife the same way. You trained him to make everything harder, he said. He pushed Atlas into the mudroom and shut the door. The pull tab I had attached to the interior handles swung once, then settled. Grant had seen me train with it dozens of times. He had watched Atlas fail, reset, and try again. But Grant had never believed repetition was intelligence. He thought it was a trick. At the doorway on day 74, Ruiz resumed the recording. This time it was Evelyn again, leaving a voicemail after the driver had departed. If you will not take the dog, we will handle it ourselves. Do not call this house again. The message ended. Ruiz looked at her. You knew the dog was still there. I knew he was in the house. With a transplant patient you had just described as confused and medically unstable. Evelyn's mouth opened, then closed. Grant's jaw tightened. Atlas could not have helped her. That was the first thing he had said all afternoon with certainty. I slid my fingers beneath Atlas's collar and felt the raised line of scar tissue there. Ruiz looked at Grant. We will get to that. After the mudroom door closed, Grant took my phone from the kitchen charger. I need this for the airport confirmations. You have your own phone. Yours has the travel app. He placed it in his coat pocket. Brooke wheeled the last suitcase through the entry. Evelyn carried my medication bag. I saw the white pharmacy label through the clear side panel. Put that back, I said. Evelyn kept walking. Grant stopped beside the wall outlet where the medical alert base was plugged in. He pulled the cord free. The indicator light stayed green. I had insisted on the battery model after a summer storm knocked out power for 9 hours. Grant had called it an expensive solution to an imaginary problem. He did not notice. The backup battery sat behind the unit, hidden by the mounting plate. It was designed for storms and power failures, not husbands. Grant pressed the front button once. Nothing happened. That thing has been malfunctioning for weeks, he said. It had not. He turned off the kitchen lights and followed his family outside. The deadbolt clicked. A few seconds later, the garage door rose. Then came the sound of tires over gravel. I called Grant's name 3 times. The first time I still expected him to return. The second time I wanted him to know I understood. The third time was only habit. After that I saved my breath. The house became very quiet. Atlas scratched once at the mudroom door. Then nothing. I reached the cabinet and opened the smart dispenser. Every compartment was empty, not delayed, not reorganized. Empty, my body had already begun warning me, a tremor in my hands. Heat under my skin, nausea rising too fast. I had already been dehydrated and my kidney function had been unstable before they left. The missing medication did not create the danger from nothing. It removed the last protection against it. I lowered myself to the floor before the floor could take me. From the mudroom came a dull impact, Atlas trying to stand. Easy, I whispered. His nails touched the door again. Higher this time. The pull tab moved once, then again. The latch released. Atlas pushed the door open with his shoulder and stood there swaying. His eyes found me. Training is not magic. It does not remove pain or confusion. It gives a body one familiar road when every other road is gone. Find, I said. Atlas came toward me, halfway across the kitchen, his rear legs folded. He stayed down for one breath, then dragged himself upright. The emergency plate was 8 feet to my left. I pointed, but my arm barely rose. Button, Atlas looked at me. Button, I said again. He turned. His first paw strike missed the center. The plate rocked against the cabinet. No light. Atlas reset his feet the way I had taught him. He pressed again. A green light flashed. Once was not enough. He looked back at me again. His paw came down a second time. The light changed from green to blue. Somewhere beyond the walls of that house, a signal left us. Atlas walked back, lowered himself against my side, and placed his head over my ribs. The last thing I heard before the sirens was the old brass mail slot whistling in the wind. The whistle disappeared beneath the thin feedback from Ruiz's recorder. Grant was still watching Atlas when he said the rescue proved nothing. Dogs hit buttons, dogs opened doors. It was coincidence. The sirens from that morning still existed somewhere in my body. Even now, whenever an ambulance passed too close, my fingers tightened before I noticed. I touched the pale ridge beneath Atlas's collar. Grant had always preferred accidents. An accident had no planner, no motive, no one who had to answer for it. Ruiz opened a veterinary report. The toxicology screen found trazodone and acepromazine in Atlas's system. Brooke looked at Evelyn. Grant spoke first. Both are used in dogs. Under veterinary supervision, Ruiz said, Atlas had no current prescription for either. He had anxiety. He's turned one page. The report also documents the service sequence he performed that afternoon. Grant gave a short laugh. A retired bomb dog does not become a paramedic. No, I said. It was the first time I had answered him directly since the door opened. He became a service dog. Grant looked at me. Ruiz did not let the silence stretch. The sequence was trained, evaluated, and documented. Door release handler location, emergency activation. Return and pressure contact. Grant's smile disappeared. A year before the trip, Atlas had failed that sequence 14 times in one afternoon. We were both newly retired then, though neither of us knew what retirement was supposed to look like. Atlas's right hip had stiffened after his last deployment. My hands shook after dialysis. I could not cross the kitchen without resting against a counter, and he could not turn sharply without losing his back feet. I fastened the red leash to his collar and pointed toward the mudroom. Door, Atlas stared at the pull tab. Door, he bit the canvas, pulled backward, and released too soon. The latch stayed closed. Grant sat at the table answering work emails. You know he cannot do what he used to, neither can I. That is not what I meant. It usually was. I shortened the tab by 2 inches. Atlas tried again. The door opened, but he walked past the emergency plate. We reset. Working dogs do not learn through speeches. They learn because the same answer remains true every time the question appears. By the 14th attempt, Atlas opened the door, found me beside the refrigerator, pressed the plate twice, then returned and leaned his chest against my legs. I sat on the floor and held his face between my hands. Grant glanced up from his laptop. All that for a button you could press yourself. I almost explained that the task was for the day I could not. Instead, I praised Atlas and gave him half a piece of dried liver. I had offered patience to a dog whose body was failing him. I had offered excuses to a husband who kept choosing not to understand. At the front door, Ruiz read from the final page. Atlas's task history was verified by Dr. Elise Ward, a civilian veterinarian and former Army Veterinary Corps officer. She also confirmed his military microchip, treatment record, and retirement transfer. Grant folded his arms. She is Naomi's friend. She treated Atlas during his service. That does not make her objective. Ruiz closed the report. Sedation did not teach this dog to open a door or call for help. It delayed a sequence his handler had trained until he could perform it under stress. Grant looked down at Atlas for the first time without contempt. It was not respect. It was recognition that something he had dismissed had acted without his permission. Ruiz shifted to the next file. Now we need to discuss the medication bag your mother carried out of this house. Evelyn straightened. I carried luggage. I did not inventory it. You were holding a clear medical case with Naomi Sloane's pharmacy label. That proves I carried it. it does not prove what was inside. She was right about one thing: a photograph alone could not prove the contents. That was why the transplant clinic had preserved everything else. When I woke in the hospital, my mouth tasted of copper and disinfectant. Atlas was not in the room. For several seconds, that frightened me more than the monitors. Dr. Priya Desai stood beside the bed. She had treated me since the transplant and had never once softened facts to make them easier to hear. "Atlas is stable," she said. "He is with veterinary staff." I closed my eyes. "Your kidney function has declined," she continued. "We believe part of the injury may be reversible, but I cannot promise there will be no lasting effect." My medicine was gone, we know. She placed a paper cup on the tray. 6 tablets rested inside it. My smart dispenser had been collected from the house. Every compartment was empty. The pharmacy records showed that my refill had been redirected 3 days earlier. My home nurse's visit had been cancelled through the caregiver portal. The cancellation request used Grant's login. Dr. Desai turned the screen toward me. "A patient can forget a dose," she said. "She cannot accidentally produce someone else's refill request, a cancelled nursing visit, and a drug level that falls on the exact morning her caregiver leaves the country." I stared at the medication cup. Until then, some part of me had still been looking for a mistake large enough to explain everything. A misunderstanding, a rushed departure, a bag picked up by the wrong person. The records did not leave room for that kind of mercy. "Do not call him yet," I said. Dr. Desai studied my face. I was not planning to. Preserve the dispenser, the alert log too. "And whatever the veterinary team finds, you need rest." "I need both." My voice was weak, but it did not shake. That was the first decision I made after Grant left. Not revenge. Not confrontation. Preservation. At the house on day 74, Evelyn reached into a leather document case. If Naomi was hospitalized, then I had authority to manage her affairs. She produced a notarized durable financial power of attorney and held it toward the deputy. This gave Grant authority over the property and accounts. My attorney, Claire Harlan, stepped forward. "Place it on the table." Evelyn tightened her grip. "It is a valid document." "Then you should have no concern about preserving it correctly." Claire put on a pair of gloves before accepting the pages. Grant looked at me with the expression he had used when explaining forms he believed I would not understand. "You signed that after the transplant." "I did not." "You were taking strong medication." "I did not sign it." Claire turned the final page toward the light. The notary seal had landed slightly off-center. Along the lower edge was a shallow crescent where part of the stamp had failed to print. Evelyn's eyes moved to it. Only for a second, Ruiz saw. So did I. 4 days after the rescue, Lily came to the hospital carrying a postcard. She was 16, all elbows and careful questions, with a stamp album tucked under one arm. "My mom said not to visit," she told me. "Then why are you here?" "Because this came to your house." The postcard showed Prague under a purple sky. On the back, Brooke had written that they hoped I was resting, and that Grant would call the clinic the next morning. He had not called. Lily placed the card on my blanket. "I think something is wrong with it." She opened her stamp album and removed the flat magnifying glass stored inside the cover. Lily had collected postmarks since she was 8. She knew the difference between a city cancellation, a bulk mail mark, and decorative ink meant to look traveled. She held the glass above the lower edge of the postcard. A line of gray print appeared beneath the photograph. "Produced and fulfilled by North Star Direct Mail, Newark, New Jersey." "This is supposed to be from Prague," Lily whispered. I did not ask her to search her mother's computer. I did not ask her to confront anyone. "You did the right thing bringing it here," I said. "Now let the adults carry it." She looked relieved and terrified at the same time. I asked a nurse for an empty specimen envelope. Without touching the card again, I slid the postcard and its mailing sleeve inside. Under Lily's magnifying glass, the word Newark looked larger than Prague. That night, after the last nurse left, I spread the postcard sleeve, the pharmacy printout, and the canceled care notice across the rolling table beside my bed. The room was quiet except for the pump at the end of the hall and the soft click of the air vent. I did not open an account that was not mine. I did not call the vendor. I wrote only what I could prove. When the card arrived, who had touched it, when the refill changed, and which login canceled the nurse. By 2 a.m, I had 3 pages of dates and no theory I needed anyone to believe. The records already agreed with one another. Ruiz turned the Prague postcard over beneath the entry light. North Star Direct Mail, he said, Newark, New Jersey. Brooke lifted one shoulder. It is a printing company. Lots of influencers use fulfillment services. Ruiz placed a second sheet beside the postcard. The account was opened from your Lodge campaign workspace. 7 cards were designed, paid for with the Lodge card, and scheduled before your family left the United States. Brooke's face stayed still, but her hand moved toward her phone. Ruiz noticed. The first card was set to enter the mail stream after your arrival in Paris. The last was scheduled for the week before you came home. They were a surprise for Naomi. Then why did the messages match entries placed in her caregiver log? Grant looked at Brooke. She looked back at him as if he had just changed the script without warning. Ruiz read from the Paris card, rest, we will call tomorrow morning. Then he read from the caregiver portal, patient advised to rest. Family will contact clinic tomorrow morning, same promise. Same wording, same call that never happened. The postcards had not been written to reach me. They had been written to reach whoever read the file after I was gone. On day 5, Claire Harlan came to the hospital with a yellow legal pad and no expression on her face. She was the kind of attorney who treated panic as wasted motion. The clinic found a redirected refill, she said. The bank found something else. She opened a folder. A home equity line of credit for $310,000 had been requested against my house. The application included the financial power of attorney naming Grant as my agent. Copies had been mailed to the lender and to a secondary address tied to Evelyn. Part of the money had already been released into an account connected to the lodge. I never authorized this, I said. Claire tapped the signature line. I know, my name was there, but it leaned too far right. The letters were smooth. Mine had not been smooth since dialysis damaged the nerves in my fingers. Can the bank reverse it? They can freeze what remains. Recovery takes longer. I looked at the pages until the words stopped moving. Grant had not only taken the medicine that kept my body from rejecting a kidney. He had used a false version of my name to make my home accept his debt. Claire placed a complaint form in front of me. My hand shook as I signed. I did not try to hide it. A weak hand can still tell the truth. By day 29, I could walk one full hospital corridor without sitting down. By day 35, Atlas could manage the same distance before his hip began to drag. While we relearned ordinary movement, Brooke posted a video from a terrace above Lake Como. Grant raised a glass toward the camera. Evelyn stood behind him in a silk scarf, smiling as though the future had already cleared. The caption said the lodge was entering a new chapter. That week, the lender released the first portion of the home equity line. Grant believed the power of attorney had survived. He believed the bank had accepted his version of my signature. He believed my silence meant incapacity, not strategy. He was wrong about one important thing. I was no longer protecting him from the meaning of his own records. At the doorway, Brooke unlocked her phone. Ruiz said, "Put it on the table." "I am calling my attorney. You may do that after the device is secured." "This is insane." Her thumb moved across the screen. The deputy stepped closer. Ruiz did not raise his voice. The preservation order already captured the workspace history. Deleting it now will not remove the records. Brooke stopped. For the first time, fear replaced performance. She set the phone down. I only scheduled content. Grant handled the medical side. Evelyn turned toward her. "Do not say another word." Grant looked at both of them with open disgust. The family had crossed an ocean together. They had taken photographs beneath monuments, eaten at white tablecloth restaurants, and posted captions about loyalty. It took less than 10 minutes inside my doorway for them to begin separating their own hands from the same act. Ruiz opened a report showing every saved version of the postcard campaign. One draft contained an extra sentence that had been removed before printing. "If Naomi is not answering, assume she is sleeping." Brooke stared at it. That was placeholder text. Who supplied it? She said nothing. The word Newark had given us a vendor. The vendor gave us an account. The account gave us a workspace. The workspace gave us earlier versions the family believed no one would ever read. On day 13, I met Ruiz in a plain interview room with beige walls and a clock that ticked too loudly. Atlas lay beneath my chair. His front paws were crossed, but every time someone walked past the door, one ear lifted. Ruiz asked me to place the postcard, mailing sleeves, pharmacy printouts, and photographs on the table. I had sealed each item separately. I had written the date, time, source, and every person who touched it. Ruiz studied my evidence log. You did this before? Different kind of evidence. He looked at the military working dog insignia on an old document tab, then back at me. How different, usually louder, that was all I said. He did not ask me to tell a war story. I was grateful for that. Ruiz opened the outer sleeve but left the postcard untouched. A postcard can lie in the sentence written on it, he said. It cannot choose the facility that first accepted it into the mail stream. He explained that the loan documents and the power of attorney had also moved through the mail. That brought the identity and financial records into his investigation. It did not mean every betrayal in my marriage had become a federal case. It meant someone had used the mail to carry a fraud from one desk to another. Before I left, he gave me one instruction: do not search Grant's accounts. Do not enter his devices, do not contact the vendor yourself. I understand. Knowing how to preserve evidence does not give you authority to collect whatever you want. It was not a reprimand, it was a boundary. For most of my life, agency had meant doing the next necessary thing with my own hands. Recovery taught me that sometimes agency meant placing the evidence in the right hands and allowing the process to move without me. Grant must have sensed that movement. 2 days later, he sent an email to my doctors, the bank, and Claire. He wrote that I had become confused, paranoid, and unstable because of post-traumatic stress and transplant medication. He claimed I had previously signed the power of attorney and had now forgotten. He warned that I might accuse family members of stealing from me. At the doorway, he pointed toward me. There, look at her. She turned a family trip into a federal operation because she cannot separate memory from trauma. Claire opened a gray file. Grant kept speaking. She has nightmares. She checks doors 3 times. She makes the dog perform emergency drills in the kitchen. I have been managing her affairs because she could not. I rested both hands on the top of my cane. The evaluation is in the file, I said. Grant looked toward Claire. That was the problem with using a diagnosis as a weapon. The moment he made my capacity the center of his defense, every date, appointment, note, and signature became relevant. During the next 2 weeks, I completed an independent capacity evaluation. The doctor asked me to identify dates, explain financial decisions, repeat information after delays, and describe the consequences of granting someone power of attorney. Halfway through, my medication alarm sounded. I stopped the evaluation, opened the paper cup prepared by the transplant nurse, and took the dose with water. The doctor noted the interruption. So did I. Grant's email said I could not manage medication. The hospital records showed that, before he redirected the refill, my adherence had been consistent. The transplant education notes showed he had attended 2 sessions where Dr. Desai explained extremeness of missed doses. His signature appeared beneath the caregiver instructions. He had not misunderstood the danger. He had signed beneath it. The capacity specialist found no evidence that I lacked the ability to understand my finances, medical care, or legal decisions. The evaluation did not say I was fearless, uninjured, or untouched by trauma. It said I knew what I was choosing. That was enough. Back in the entryway, Claire placed the gray evaluation file beside Evelyn's power of attorney. Then Ruiz opened a copy of Evelyn's notary journal. 3 documents lay between them, 3 blue seals. Each one carried the same shallow crescent missing from its lower edge. Claire aligned the documents by their lower edges. The power of attorney, a property filing Evelyn had notarized the year before. A loan document from the lodge. Each blue seal was missing the same thin crescent at the bottom. Evelyn leaned toward the table. Notary stamps wear unevenly. They do, Claire said. That is why the journal matters. She opened the copied journal to the date printed on my power of attorney. The entry claimed I had signed at Evelyn's kitchen table at 3:15 in the afternoon. At 3:15 that afternoon, I had been inside the transplant clinic, completing a blood draw and medication review. The parking record showed my car entering the hospital garage. The clinic camera showed me walking in with Atlas. Dr. Desai's notes placed me in an exam room for the next hour. Evelyn's journal listed no identification number, no witness, and no travel address. Claire tapped the signature. A power of attorney can transfer authority. It cannot manufacture the signature that supposedly created it. Evelyn reached for the pages. The deputy stopped her hand before she touched them. I made a clerical error, she said. Ruiz looked at Grant. Who instructed the lender to release the first draw? Grant stared at the documents without answering. The vendor logs had led to the postcard workspace. The postcards had led to the caregiver language. The caregiver language had led back to Grant's access history. The mailed loan documents connected the financial motive to the same timeline. Then the veterinary toxicology arrived, then the notary journal. Then a cloud archive Grant did not know still existed. Grant recorded voice memos after difficult claims meetings. He said speaking helped him separate emotion from exposure. Most of those recordings concerned work, one did not. It had been created the night before the flight and automatically synchronized to a shared home backup account. Ruiz did not play it for me immediately. He asked whether I wanted to hear it. No, I said, not then. I had already learned enough to stop doubting myself. I did not need Grant's voice living inside another hospital room. But the recording still became evidence. By day 69, the evidence package filled 184 pages and weighed just over 4 pounds. I had built the first chain from my hospital bed, then Ruiz, Claire, the clinic, the bank, and the veterinary team had added only what their authority allowed them to collect. It contained the 7 original postcards and mailing sleeves, the North Star account history, the pharmacy and caregiver portal logs, Atlas's toxicology and task record, my capacity evaluation, the forged power of attorney, Evelyn's notary journal, the lender file, and the preserved voice memo. The smallest detail Grant and Evelyn had missed was the shallow crescent missing from the lower edge of every blue seal. I did not need to argue with the package. Its dates, access logs, signatures, and recordings spoke in the order they had created them. On day 69, Claire placed a protective order on the table beside a signed search warrant. Law enforcement will control the return, she said. You do not have to be there. Yes, I do. That is not required. I know. I did not want a confrontation. I wanted Grant to see that survival had not turned me into a rumor other people managed for me. Claire studied me for a long moment. One sentence, she said. No argument, no accusations. You let the warrant do the talking. I agreed. Before we left the hospital grounds, Lily called. Her voice was small. Is my mom going to jail? I do not know. She says I ruined everything. You did not create what they did. But I brought you the postcard. You brought me the truth. Those are not the same thing. The education account I had helped fund for Lily had been pulled into the financial review because Grant tried to use family accounts as collateral. I asked Claire to separate it wherever the law allowed and to keep Lily's name out of public filings when possible. Grant's choices would have consequences. They did not need to become an inheritance for a 16-year-old girl. Ruiz controlled the warrant. Claire controlled the legal filings. But the sequence on the entry table was mine. I had chosen the postcard first because it opened the mail trail, the medical records next because they closed the accident defense, the notary journal after that because the false authority depended on it, and the recording last because by then Grant would have nowhere left to rename what he had done. The system had gathered more than I could have gathered alone. I had decided how the truth would meet him at the door. At the house on day 74, Ruiz placed a small digital recorder on the entry table. Grant finally looked away from the defective seals. What is that? A copy of a file recovered under warrant. Ruiz pressed play. Grant's own voice filled the room. If the medication interruption is documented as non-compliance, the claim stays clean. Atlas has to be out before the nurse misses the visit. Once Naomi is declared unable to manage her affairs, the house can secure the lodge note. No one moved. The recording continued. Do not write anything about life expectancy. Let the doctors reach their own conclusion. Brooke closed her eyes. Evelyn gripped the handle of her suitcase until her knuckles whitened. Grant's face did not collapse. He became still. Stillness had once been one of the things I loved about him. I thought it meant calm. Now I understood that sometimes stillness was only a person calculating which truth had become too expensive to deny. Ruiz stopped the recording. Grant looked at me. You do not understand the pressure I was under. There it was. Not denial, not grief, accounting. The lodge employed people, he continued. My mother put everything into it. Brooke had contracts. We were going to lose all of it. Ruiz said, that explanation can be provided through counsel. Grant stepped toward me. The deputy moved between us. We are still married, Grant said. You cannot let them turn this into attempted murder. I kept my hand on Atlas's collar. Claire had told me one sentence. I used it. You do not come through this door again. Ruiz unfolded the warrant. He identified the devices, luggage, financial records, and travel materials authorized for seizure. The deputy directed Grant, Evelyn, and Brooke to separate positions on the porch while additional officers approached from the driveway. Brooke asked for her phone. No one gave it to her. Evelyn began blaming Lily. That was the only moment my voice sharpened. "Leave her out of this." Grant looked at the house, then at Atlas, then at me. For 74 days, he had believed he was returning to property. Instead, he had returned to jurisdiction. The officers carried the first suitcase past us. Atlas remained beside my leg. The old red leash rested loosely in my hand. When the last officer crossed the threshold, I stepped back and closed the door. The brass mail slot caught the October wind and gave one thin whistle. 2 months later, another door opened into a small hearing room. Dr. Elise Ward carried Atlas's service record through it. She did not wear a uniform. She wore a dark civilian suit and reading glasses on a cord, but when Atlas saw her, his tail struck the floor once. The hearing officer asked her to state her qualifications. Dr. Ward described her years in the Army Veterinary Corps, her work with military working dogs, and the treatment she had provided Atlas during his final assignment. Grant's attorney tried to reduce the issue to ownership. Atlas was retired when this occurred, yes, Dr. Ward said. So he was no longer performing military duties, no. Then his actions have no bearing on Staff Sergeant Sloan's military service. Dr. Ward opened the record. His actions show continuity of training. The handler who taught him to search, stop, report, and remain functional under stress later adapted those same principles to a medical task. She read the training dates, the task evaluations, and the injury notes. Then she looked toward Grant. Staff Sergeant Sloan did not clean kennels and teach dogs to sit. She maintained a working animal whose mistakes could cost lives. More importantly, she knew when his body could no longer perform the old job, and she trained him for a new one. I did not look at Grant. Atlas rested his head across my shoes. Being seen was quieter than I had imagined. No one stood. No one applauded. A record was corrected in a room where records mattered. That was enough. On March 18th, the lender released the false lien against my house and filed the corrected property record. By the time the separate plea hearings ended on August 21st, the lender had completed its accounting. Of the $310,000 line, $186,400 had been drawn. The bank recovered $142,800 from the lodge account and the liquidation of lodge equipment pledged to the debt. The remaining $43,600, plus $75,360 in medical, veterinary, and property record correction costs, produced joint restitution orders totaling $118,960. 10 months after the rescue, the state and federal sentences produced an effective 11-year term for Grant, followed by supervised release. His insurance license was revoked. Evelyn lost her notary commission and received a shorter custodial sentence for the forged documents and financial fraud. Brooke pleaded guilty to her part in the mailed scheme, surrendered the campaign income, and was ordered to pay restitution. None of them were chased from stores or hunted by strangers. The consequences came in stamped envelopes, canceled credentials, frozen accounts, and doors that opened only when an officer allowed them to. The divorce was completed without Grant entering the same room as me. Claire placed 2 stacks on her desk. One contained the restitution orders, the corrected property filings, and the release of the false lien against my house. The other contained Lily's education account. We separated it, Claire said. Her portion will remain protected. I signed the final page. Grant requested a meeting before he was transferred. I declined. Forgiveness is often described as a door. People rarely mention that some doors should remain locked even after the anger is gone. A year after the day Atlas pressed the emergency plate, I began volunteering at a training center for veterans learning to work with service dogs. Atlas was fully retired by then. He spent most afternoons sleeping beneath the front desk and waking only when someone opened a treat bag. I hung the red leash on a wooden peg beside the training room. It was no longer field equipment. It was no longer the object Grant had used to drag Atlas away from me. It had become proof that a tool can survive the person who misused it. Before the first class arrived, I wrote one postcard. The front showed a plain Virginia field after rain. No monument, no perfect skyline, just wet grass and a fence disappearing into morning fog. I addressed it to Lily. None of this was yours to carry, I wrote. Telling the truth did not break your family. It revealed where the breaks already were. I did not promise that everything would become easy. I promised that if she ever needed a safe adult, she could write. Then I slipped the card through the outgoing mail slot. Behind me, a young veteran gave a new service dog the command to open a training door. The dog pulled the canvas tab, the latch released. Atlas lifted his head but did not stand. Sunlight crossed the floor and stopped beside his paws. For years, I believed strength meant staying useful no matter how much pain I hid. I know better now. Some people will call any boundary cruel when they were the ones benefiting from its absence. They will tell you that preserving evidence is disloyal, that asking for records is paranoid, or that closing a door means you have refused to forgive. It does not. A boundary is not revenge. It is the point where another person's access to you stops being more important than your safety. If you have ever been taught to confuse endurance with love, you do not need permission to keep absorbing the damage. You are allowed to save the message. Request the record, call the person whose duty is to listen, and protect the part of your life someone else has treated as collateral. If someone you know may need that reminder today, share this story with them. They may not need permission to fight. They may only need permission to preserve what is true and choose which door opens next. Strength is knowing which doors to open, which evidence to preserve, and which people no longer deserve access to your life. Atlas sighed and went back to sleep beside the open door. The postcards tried to write my ending. The dog opened the door.